Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show.
Oh, I hit the button too soon. Hello, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I'm super duper excited to be here with you. And let's see, this episode, okay, I'm calling this sucker When Helping Hurts. When helping hurts. And you might be thinking to yourself, what do you mean? Isn't Mr. Rogers told us to look for the helpers, KK? Isn't helping what we want to do? We want to help the people. We want to help the animals. We want to help the planet and the environment and the trees and the oceans and the little fishies, like all of it. Yes, yes, and more yes. And and there are some times when our helping can actually be not so soothing, not so helpful. In fact, sometimes helping can hurt. And let's dive into this a little bit. I've been thinking about this for several different reasons, coming at it from a bunch of different points of view. And I'll tell you a little story and I'll give you some examples and stuff like that. But one of the quotes that I couldn't help but think of, and I think this goes back to, I want to say his name is Saint Bernard. I know he was a French theologian, like mid 12th century. I'm pretty sure he's the one who coined this phrase. He might not have said it exactly like this, but this is where the heartbeat of this phrase comes from, which is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So this idiom, this proverb is often attributed to him and then of course other people beyond, like in the 16th century, went on to say it in their own ways. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And what that really means is that there is often sometimes a difference, like an outcome that is other than what the person intended, right? So what they intend to do, they quote unquote intend to be helpful, but then whatever actions or outcomes that come from those intentions are not exactly what they had planned. So sometimes even our great desire to be helpful can have tragic or not so soothing or sometimes even awful like outcomes instead of the good intentions that inspired those actions. You know what I mean? And so I know for myself, I really do identify in some ways as a helper, right? I love to help people. I love to help animals. I love to problem solve. I love to be helpy. I'm a helpy person. And that's nice. And we also have to keep an eye on where does the impulse to help come from. And maybe we'll dive a little bit more deeper into that. But sometimes, right? And I tell people this when we first meet or when we first, are starting a friendship or when we first start working together. One of the things I will often tell them is in my desire to be helpful and in my enthusiasm to be helpful, I might sometimes come across as like a little pushy or a little bossy or whatever. Just know that that is not my intention. And if that is how it's feeling for you, please do tell me because it really does come from a desire to be helpful. It comes from a loving place. But I never want to take away somebody else's opportunity to learn something or to have their own experience. You know what I mean? So I kind of try to cut it off at the pass, like to meet it to meet it right away and just say, hey, just be on the lookout for this. Because sometimes in my enthusiasm to be helpful, like I don't want to be stepping on people's toes or robbing them from their own experience. And I'm sure at some point in your life, and just double amen hands if you can relate to this, you have uttered the words, well, I was just trying to help. I was only trying to help. But the help given was not the help received, or how it was perceived was not helpful. Because sometimes people might be feeling like, well, I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for your damn help. So here's an example. Okay, let me give you an example. Um, so I'll give you a human story and then I'll give you some animal stories. Okay. So here's one of an example of like the wrong kind of help. One of the wrong kind of help is that the helper, the one who is doing the helper, assumes that they know what is best. So they just dive right into helping. They get a plan of action. They start to help. They try to help. Okay. But they're assuming that they know what is best for the helpee. And a lot of times they don't ask first. So, for example, you know how if somebody has a death in the family, or somebody's kid is sick, or somebody gets a cancer diagnosis, or there's some sort of thing that happens. And people will start, and there's different things. Sometimes people will do like a GoFundMe or something like that, but sometimes people often will do like these, I think they call them meal trains or like meal planner things where people will post it somewhere and then other people can sign up and say, oh, I'll do Monday dinner. And somebody else is like, oh, I'll bring dinner over to this family, this whatever, on Tuesdays and da 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 da. That's really lovely. It's incredibly generous. It's incredibly kind. It's compassionate. It's all of those things. It's wonderful. However, if that person or that family or that organization or whatever didn't ask for the help, didn't ask for it for whatever reason, maybe they have food allergies. Maybe they need their food prepared in a very particular way. Maybe they're really proud. Maybe they don't want to be seen as somebody who is sick or whatever, right? And so I think that in those cases, our desire to be helpful can actually be more harmful because that person gets aggravated, agitated, is like, I don't have a place to put all this food. I don't want this food. I don't like this food, right? Like whatever. So the kindness and the gesture is there. But what if we just asked first and got permission and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing, rather than just assuming the person, the place, the family, whatever, is going to want that thing. Because sometimes, and it's not for you to judge or to whatever, for whatever their own reason, they don't want your damn help, right? And so we can be a little encroaching, a little pushy, right? Because we make the assumption, oh, well, I would want that help, or that's what I would want to do, or I wish somebody did that for me. But we're all individuals and we all have preferences and we all have different needs and we all are willing to have different levels of involvement from outside sources. So it can be really helpful to just like ask first, right? That a little can go a long way in this area. When it comes to animals, I mean, and I've heard stories about this, and they're just things that I've been told and that I know is like, so many people, like if you try to help a baby bird, let's just use a chicken, for example. If you try to help a chick who is struggling to hatch, if you try to speed up their hatching process, right? And I don't even like to think about, I mean, I love baby chicks. They're the most cutest, beautiful, gentle little things. But so often it's because they're in fucking hatcheries, which don't even get me started about the chickens and the poor chickens and what they go through and the baby chicks and the male chicks. Like it's horrifying. But let's just say like whatever you somehow stumbled across right some eggs and there's a baby chick that's trying to hatch. If you try to force that and speed it up because you're like, oh my God, look, he's struggling, I'm gonna try and like peel back the egg and pluck him out of there. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, it is incredibly dangerous and it can cause harm. You can cause that little baby chick to like literally bleed out. You can force it and rush a process instead of allowing the natural evolution of that process to happen. It's the same thing with butterflies. You see people who think they're being helpful by trying to like help a butterfly like come out of its cocoon or whatever. But the way that a butterfly gains its wing strength and its ability to survive out in the world is it needs to go through that struggle first. So it's actually not helpful at all to try and help them by speeding up the process, right? It'd be like any different than like you're not going to try and like speed up a woman's like you're not gonna like when somebody is I mean, of course, there are situations when a baby is born too soon, right? Preemies, whatever happens, right? Medical complications, whatever happens. But you're not gonna go into like a pregnant woman who wants to have a child, right? And be like, okay, 5 months, let's speed this up, like let's go. You know what I'm saying? So we've got to let things kind of take their natural evolution sometimes. And it's usually our own discomfort of being like, oh, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. I don't like to watch this struggle. But sometimes the struggle is exactly what a being or a creature needs. Now, of course, I'm not talking about use your common sense. There are going to be times when an animal is struggling, like when you see a turtle or something heading towards a direction where you like are like, this is not going to end well, right? There are times, of course, when we should intervene, but we better do our homework and we better know what we're doing and not just make assumptions. We should not make assumptions about animals because they cannot speak. They cannot, raise their little paw, their little fin or the little feather and say, please put me down or stop this or whatever, right? So educate yourself. Call a wildlife rehabilitator, right? Don't assume that like you know what to do, because a lot of times, like I said, our desire to be helpful can actually be harmful. And it's the same thing with people, right? Maybe talk to them first. And I get it. Sometimes it's like you want to do the right thing or you want to be seen in a particular way, right? And that's when we get down to, so I wrote down some examples of when helping is more harmful than helpful. And one of these is when it's about you and your ego, when it's about your arrogance, right? How you want to be viewed, how you want to be seen, like again, if you have the identity as a helper, you really get off on like helping sometimes. It's like that dopamine hit. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm feeding into this idea I have of myself. So it's more sometimes about our ego and our arrogance than it is really about the other person. And that's the thing is like, I think back, so I often will say, like, because of a lot of the stress and trauma that I had as a kid, it created a little bit of what I would say at times, and maybe even still have a little touch. And I don't mean it condescendingly when I say like it's a touch of OCD, right? I certainly have certain behaviors that I do when I start to feel a little more stressed or overwhelmed, and whether that's like cleaning or organizing or straightening things out, and and we don't. It's this isn't all about me, but like just I identify sometimes I can notice that I like to organize things now. I used to like go into like I did it to my sister all the time. I used to like go into her house and I'd be like, why is the toaster there? It's gonna work. Wait, now here's the thing. I was a professional organizer. I basically turned my compulsion to help and my compulsion to organize into a gig. But when you do it without getting somebody else's permission, when you just go in and you're like, this should be here and this should be here, and I would move shit around and people would be like, what the fuck? And I'd be like, oh, but I'm just helping. Like I'm just trying to be helpful. And it's like, but that's not where we want it. And in our world, for you to put that there, it doesn't make sense because my kids do X, Y, and Z, or my sweetie does X, Y, and Z, right? So a lot of times our desire to be helpful is about our own arrogance, our own ego rather than about the other person. So we kind of try to disguise it under like, oh yeah, I was just helping. I was just organizing. I was just X, Y, and Z. And the other person is like, no, it's that way for a fucking reason. And if you had just asked instead of assumed and just went ahead and did your thing. Oh my God. Okay. Here's another couple of examples when helping is more harmful, when it hurts. It's when your helping goes too far. Because when our helping goes too far, it crosses into enabling, right? And sometimes our enabling behaviors actually keep somebody trapped in the victim loop that they're in, or in the sickness that they're in, or in the addiction or whatever that they're in. We try to quote unquote be helpful to lessen their suffering. And again, though, sometimes that suffering, or what they'll sometimes say in 12 steps, right, is like communities is hitting bottom, or, hitting rock bottom, or, we try to keep somebody from having to deal with the consequences and the ramifications of their choices. And if you keep doing that, if you keep making excuses for them, if you keep, calling into work sick for them, if you keep fill in the blank for them, right? Trying to make things right for them, apologizing on their behalf, right? They never get the opportunity to own their own shit and to get better for the right reason. And it made me think about like we used to, I don't know if the show is still on. I guess I could have Googled that, but like back in the day, there was a show called Interventions. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those shows. But an intervention, as many of you know, is when either your family members or your friends or your sweetie, your partner, whoever it is, get together because they feel like they need to intervene on your own behalf for yourself because you're doing something, usually something that has to do with an addiction of some kind. And they sit down and they basically just kind of pull you into a space, and usually they spring it on you. You think you're going to a party or your meal or going to somebody's house, and you get in there and there's like a little kumbaya circle of people with their letters and their stories of things that they want to say to you. And I've heard a lot of interventions. I've heard about a lot of interventions not going well, not going well. And I think it kind of has something to do. And I'm not saying all interventions are bad. Like I am not a sobriety coach. I am, even though, I know a lot of people. I've been to Al-Anon. I know a lot of people in recovery and stuff like that. But I leave the substance use disorder stuff to the professionals, right? Not that I can't, and I have worked with people who were going through that process. But I'm not somebody who does interventions, you know what I mean? But I have heard of some people who have been intervened upon, and it sometimes does not go well. In fact, it pushes people away from any kind of help. And it's because, like, I believe part of it is you can't force people into doing things that they're not ready for. And it's the same in my line of work, like as a spiritual mentor. It's like I can't convince people that doing this kind of work, personal development, spiritual work, etc., mindset work, whatever you want to call it, you can't force it on people. You can't make people do it, right? There's that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, right? And if somebody is trying to get sober for you and not themselves, it's not going to last very long. And so I have heard stories of people like having interventions, and so they decide to go to rehab or to do whatever. And then, they're out for 10 days and they're using again. And because it wasn't about them, it wasn't their choice. They're doing it out of guilt or shame, or because the whole family got together and said, you're such a fuck up, or this is the consequences of what we've been dealing with because of you and your habits and whatever. I'm not saying that an intervention can't be successful. I'm just saying again, there are times when in our desire to be helpful, we can be a little more harmful and sometimes even do more hurt. It can be more debilitating than it is, more negative than it is positive. So sometimes our desire to be helpful, again, anybody here, double amen hands, if you've were raised by somebody with who was an alcoholic or a drug abuser, or drug user, or if you were love somebody or dated somebody or have a sibling or a friend, we know that sometimes that codependency, that codependent relationship that gets formed, especially if it started when you were a young kid, it will often then continue in with, like, if one of your parents are caretakers, right? It will often continue into your adult relationships as well. And so we have to be keeping an eye on what it is in us that the fear in us that comes up, right? The patterns in us that come up when we feel the compulsion to like fix things for other people, especially adults. We've got to sometimes just let adults be adults, which leads me to my next example. When we're always fixing things for people, especially kids. If you never let a kid fall down and hurt themselves, if you never let, I'm not saying, please, again, I know common sense is not always common, but let's do our best to put our common sense caps on as I'm talking today. You're not going to let a kid run into traffic. I'm not talking about that kind of falling or hurting, right? Where those things are deadly, really dangerous. But I'm just saying, if we're always fixing things, if you don't let your kid suffer the consequences of not doing their homework, if you don't let your kid try out for a team that you're pretty sure he's probably not going to make, if you never let your kid feel disappointed, let down, right, whatever, that to me ends up turning into a disaster, because one of the things that you're taking from them is their ability to, you take away their opportunity to learn. to learn about themselves, to learn about the world, to learn about just what they're capable of. And if you are always trying to make it easy for them, right, then they never learn that they can handle what life is going to throw at them. And I see it a lot. I see a lot of younger kids, kids that are going off to high school or then going off to college and then out of college trying to create their next steps in life. They're not capable. They feel completely overwhelmed and stressed out by life because if we keep handing things to kids, if yes, there are times when it's totally appropriate to help your children, and there are other times when it's like they need to learn that they can figure things out, that they're really smart, that they're good problem solvers, that they're tougher than, and I'm not talking to like tough love all the time. I'm just saying I think kids need to learn a certain amount of tenacity, right? To be tenacious and to be what's the word I'm looking for? Resilient, and to know that they have some grit and that they can bounce back and that they can fall down and get knocked on their ass and get back up again. I think these things are like really, really important. Of course, all of that mixed with a lot of attaboy, attagirl, attakid, a lot of like, bolstering up of their, like letting them know that they matter, that they're loved, that they're capable. Of course, balance with kindness and stuff. But we can't like, what are the bubble wrap parenting, the helicopter parenting, the I'm so afraid that my poor kid is going to skin their knee, whatever it is. It's like, no, not every kid makes the team and not every kid gets the part in the play. Not every kid gets into the college. Not every kid gets the boy or the girl or the person that they're attracted to or whatever the thing is, right? And it's that lack of ability to navigate life that can cause a lot of problems. It can be way more hurtful and harmful for them as they grow and mature, leave the protection of your home and have to go out into the world and they realize like, oh, nobody, not everybody caters to my whims and my needs and my preferences, right? This is where we talk about a lot of the privilege like can come from. A lot of that expectation that the world is supposed to bend to their will, right? So we want to set them up for success. And part of that sometimes is not helping them, right? Is not always helping them. Again, there's a time when to help them can basically take them out at the knees rather than strengthen them. Um, Again, we already talked about the next one when it's about you and your ego and really not about the other person. Okay, this is a big one, this next one. And please, I hope if you recognize yourself in any of these, that you don't take it personally like you're being attacked or feel the need to defend anything or anything like that. This really is just self-awareness. And as I always say, everything that I'm talking about is always from my ears first. A lot of times this is me reminding me. So like today me wants to remind future me to keep an eye on this shit. You know what I mean? So sometimes we like to get all helpy and up in other people's business. Excuse me, I had to take a drink because we want a distraction. Because who here has ever known somebody, and I was this person a long time ago, you like to have a project, right? You like to have a project. I still like to have projects. I just don't want them to be people. I am not interested in having people as projects anymore, right? I'm not here to save anybody. I am not here to fix anybody. I am not here to convince anybody, again, of anything. It's like, so many people oftentimes love to get up in everybody else's business as a distraction so that they don't have to take a look at themselves, so they don't have to focus on their own like burning pile. I'm like, hey, your own house is on fire. You might want to take that hose that you're trying to help put out everybody else's fires, right? Hey, take that toolkit, take those band-aids, take that shit back over there, right? To your own address, your own longitude and latitude, because it is lacking over there. That's where you need to put yourself. But for a lot of people, they stay wicked busy and they stay up and like, volunteering for this or going this or teaching that or doing that. And they're doing 18,000 things because, oh, so and so needs my help, or oh, they can't do it without me, or oh, I need to be on this board or this thing or that thing. And it's because they don't want to have to sit in their own skin. They don't want to have to face their own life. They don't want to have to face their own, whether it's their marriage, their health, their own relationships, their kids don't want, whatever the situation is, right? They use it as a distraction. They use it as a way to not have to face what is in front of them and within them. A lot of times it's within them because if I just stay so busy and I just stay so focused on everybody else, I don't have to take a look at the dumpster fire that is that is burning inside me or around me in my own situation. You know what I mean? So sometimes people would rather have a project than to focus on their own shit. And again, don't this isn't about making anybody feel bad. This is about just an opportunity to recognize like, oh yeah, man, I kind of do that. And just getting a little more clarity on where your energy and your efforts and your enthusiasm and stuff would be better spent. You know, we really can't help people that effectively if we are not taking care of our own stuff. Um, it's just something to consider and to think about. Okay, another time when to be like super duper helpful is harmful or hurtful is when we try to help beyond our own means or our own resources. If you become the person that everybody else is always like, oh, she'll fix it, she'll do it, she'll take care of that. Call her, call this, do that, right? You become that go-to person for everybody and nobody else is doing it for you. It's really easy to kind of slip into resentment and into anger. And there's nothing wrong. Sometimes anger is totally appropriate, but we can start to slip into that kind of martyr role. And when it's really imbalanced in that way, that's not very healthy. And if we start to develop the kind of that feeling of being taken for granted or taken advantage of, or why am I always the one that has to do everything? Or, if it really starts to become, where you're helping beyond your means, right? Like there's so many scams nowadays. Like elderly people are being scammed all the time, where like some young and attractive person will reach out to them on the internet and convince them that they want to have a relationship with them. And they'll do the long game, man. This will go on for months and months and months. And then they innocently, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, will ask for just a little help, a little money just until Tuesday when they get their paycheck or whatever bullshit racket they're running. And I see a lot of people end up losing all of their savings in a desire to be helpful. And if you're giving beyond your means or your resources, that's not great for anybody. You see it with churches sometimes. You see it when, people feel like they have to tithe or always give every week when they go to church. They have no money in their own friggin' pocket or savings account, but they're like giving away, giving away. And look at there's a lot of ways to help. Doesn't always have to be monetary. You might mentor somebody, you might volunteer, you might, make little blankets for preemie babies. You might volunteer at the animal shelter, whatever, right? Sometimes our resources can be our time. But even then, if you're giving more than you have to give, you can get sick. You can get exhausted. And some of the things that you were put on this earth to do, some of your own individual curriculum and your own assignment will get neglected because you're so busy, right? Keeping your focus out there and doing more than you are actually truly, truly, genuinely able to give. And we see this is why so many women end up with autoimmune disorders because they don't say no. They constantly give. They say yes when they mean no. You know what I'm saying? So that's another way when being helpful can be harmful. And look, I could probably do this all day. There's probably a list of like 25 easy, but I'm going to stop at 8. And here's the last one, number 8. Sometimes when helping hurts is when it diminishes somebody else's dignity, or when you see it online all the time, right? And look, I don't want to judge these people because I have no idea what's really in their heart, what's really their intention, what's really in their mind. But and some people will make the argument that, like, for example, the people who go out and like film them giving money to people are in a financial bind, or somebody who is houseless, or without housing, somebody living on the streets, or like whatever. And you see people like walking up and like doing this whole thing like, oh, whoever was going to be kind to me first, and here's $10,000, or here's this, here's that. And people are always filming it. And sometimes it leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And I understand the argument of, well, if they film it and other people see it, maybe other people will be inspired to do it. But I think that we can do those things and I think that we can do those things without needing the recognition for it or without needing to document it and without needing to broadcast it. Every once in a while, I'll see one and it's really sweet, like a little kid getting to meet their favorite like pop singer or athlete or whatever. Like there's certain things you think that's really great. And sometimes I watch them and I'm like, this is really it doesn't feel so good. Like some my spidey senses get tingly. Like an alarm goes off inside me. That bullshit alarm goes a little like, "Meh, what's this really about?" And again, it's not for me to judge. I don't know what people's true intentions are. But if you feel like you're helping in a way that can be degrading to somebody else, or it diminishes their autonomy or their authority or their own agency, if you are diminishing their dignity, we might want to take a step back and say, like, I'm doing this because a lot of times people are doing things out of their own discomfort, out of their own inability to sit with something that's challenging or difficult. And a lot of times it's like, I just need to do something. I was just trying to help. Well, you helping sometimes makes it worse. And if we're not aware of that, if we're not aware of what is going on inside of us that compels us, or we have a compulsion to be helpful. Now, having said all that, I want to say that I love helping. I'm getting better at receiving help. It's really nice. Like if you drop something out in public and a stranger like picks it up, or like my friend KT was just visiting Paris and she had like an app on her phone and somebody was lost and they asked for help and she immediately like stepped because she's a nice person, right? So look, I'm not saying don't help, right? Be the helpers, be the helpers. I think I did a whole podcast on that called Be the Helpers. And let's be mindful about the quality of our help. If our help is wanted, what's the real intention? Get under. Why am I feeling like I need to help in this situation? Educate yourself sometimes before stepping in. Just don't make the assumption that your help is wanted or needed, or that you know best for another being, whether it's human or animal. Of course, if somebody is struggling, if it's very evident, right? And sometimes you're going to have to make a judgment call, right? When I'm about to, well, by the time you guys hear this, I'll already be working at Flexible. But, when I just recently had to get my CPR updated again, so I did my little CPR test, go take the course, the whole thing at the American Red Cross. And there are going to be times you're going to find somebody unconscious. You're not going to know if unconscious, and you're not going to know if they have like an NDR or like they're like a stranger somewhere, and all is like, hey, I have the skill set. They're not breathing. I need to like jump in, right? Of course, there are going to be times in your life when you have to make a judgment call, and hopefully, the choice that we make is actually helpful and not harmful. But sometimes we just need to slow down a second. And of course, there's going to be situations where it's an emergency and you have to make a split-second decision. I'm not talking about many of these things that I talked about today. It's just a matter of like slowing down, getting really clear. Why am I doing this? What's this really about? Does that other person, who am I helping? I'm like, if you want to help somebody so bad, like help yourself, like start with yourself, start with yourself. Start being a little more proactive and helping get your mind right, your body right, your finances and bills right, your relationship right, your health and well-being, your mental health right, your spiritual life right. Like spend a little more time worrying about, ourselves before we start badging into being the self-professed authority. Just be mindful when our helping is coming from a place of arrogance versus humility. And here's a little list of like different ways when you might start to notice when it's best to stop helping another person or whatever. If you've been, whether it's an organization, whether it's a group of people, whether it's like whatever it is, a person, a particular friendship or relationship, is when you start to get emotionally exhausted. Right? When you're like, this is just way too much output. Like I cannot keep this up. right? It's gonna be detrimental to myself. Um, when there is repeatedly, when you create a boundary and that boundary gets crossed or violated, when somebody is not recognizing or respecting, when you say, "Hey, I'm willing to give this much, but nothing more," and if they keep making demands and stuff like that, when there's a lack of balance, when there's no reciprocity, when it's not a good give and receive, when you're always the giver, and the other person is always taking the help, and they're not acknowledging it. They're not, they're not taking a chance to say thank you. They're not reciprocating in any way. And look, we don't give to get the thank you, right? Just we put our heads down, we do the work, we do what we know is the right thing to do, right? Um, but at the same time, it's a good virtue. It's a good virtuous thing, right? To give. That's wonderful. But we also have to be mindful when it's totally out of balance and it's not reciprocal. The other time is oh yeah, when you start to realize like, oh, if you start to get a sneaking suspicion that you're being manipulated, you might want to pump the brakes and be like, this is something something stinks, right? Something's a little bit off here. Like this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel healthy. Um, if your help is again, if it's allowing somebody to do like harmful behavior, if your helping is keeping them like stuck in a cycle of whatever that isn't good for them. And then my big thing is, and this really also applies to me as a mentor, to me as a coach, as a yoga teacher, like it just is the work that I do. I always say, like, I'm not interested in creating codependent relationships. I'm also not interested in trying to convince people of anything, right? Like, I am not here. Like, I always say, I only really want to work with people who want to help themselves, who are willing to help themselves. So I don't want to work with clients, or I don't want to work with groups of people or whatever who are unwilling to help themselves, who don't want to, invest their own, whether it's their energy, their finances, whatever it is. If they don't want to learn, if they don't want to grow, if they are unwilling to help themselves, then I'm just gonna like slowly moonwalk out of the room, And I jokingly say, like, by the time you hear this, I will be 56 years old, right? I'm slowly marching towards 60, and I'm like, oh my God, like, what do I have left? What do I have left? Like maybe on a wicked good day, like 28, 30 years left. I don't know. And I want to be around people in both my personal and professional life that like want to really kind of live out what they're here to do, and they recognize that they have some bullshit and some blind spots. They also recognize their brilliance. Like, that's the fun. Like, I want to be around people that recognize both their brilliance and their bullshit, that recognize like, oh yeah, like I'm here to spread some love, and I got a few places where I got a few speed bumps, right? There's a few hiccups, there's a few rough spots I'm working on. And it's not to say like you need to be fixed or you're always going to be fixed. It's not that. That to me is not what personal development and stuff is. To me, spiritual work is about recognizing who you already are, right? It's about recognizing that you are already an extension of the divine, that you are a child of God, that you are the love and the light of the world. That to me is so much about what this work is. It's about removing the blocks and the barriers we have to our own brilliance, to our own innocence, to our own good, beautiful, and holy. You know what I mean? But if other people are not willing to like put in some time, put in a little effort, energy, resources, whatever it is, if they're not willing to invest in themselves in some way, like we can't drag people kicking and screaming towards their own, I was going to use the word salvation, but I don't mean it in a religious way, to them helping themselves. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not that interesting to me these days. I really appreciate it when people are like, yeah, I recognize that I'm kind of stuck in this pattern. I'm stuck in this habitual way of being and thinking and seeing and experiencing myself. Like I am kind of stuck in this story. And, I talk about the work that I do is like this transforming your story to your glory. It's like moving out of those old patterns and subconscious programming and the ways that we have identified and thought of ourselves and kind of turning on the light. You know what I mean? It's like not fighting the darkness, as Swami Kripalu says. It's like turning on the light and going like, oh yeah. So that's another thing for me. Like these days, it's like if you're not interested in helping yourself, I'm not going to keep pouring forth energy and resources and curating things and doing things. I'm like, oh, you're this person or this group of people, whatever it is, actually doesn't want this help. So why should I like bust my, as he said, why should I bust my balls? Right? Trying to help people who don't want to be helped. Oh my God. Now look, sometimes somebody might be not realizing that they need help. And again, that's when it's really hard, right? And that's when, again, things can become a little intertwined in codependency when you're trying to say, I always say, like, I cannot save people from themselves. I cannot save people from themselves. They've got to want to, do it. And that goes for all of us. It's not just me. When I say me, I can't save people. It's like you can't, right? We can't. We cannot save people from themselves. Sometimes people are hell bent on destruction, and all we can do is try to love them. And sometimes the most loving thing we can say is no, you know, and that's wicked hard. I'm not. That's wicked hard. I've known a lot of people who have had to, not let their kids in the house anymore or to turn away from loved ones and, not be in touch with their families in some cases. And it's not easy. This being human, man, it's not easy. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we often have a natural propensity and a natural desire to help, but we also have to be able sometimes to stand back, to zoom out, to open up the aperture and kind of look at the bigger picture and start to see like, oh, in my doing this, it actually hasn't been helpful at all. And we want to try to stop it and catch it before it becomes hurtful or harmful to them or to ourselves. Okay. I hope that this has been helpful and not hurtful. I hope this has been helpful, just kind of talking this out and saying some things out loud because sometimes we don't recognize it, right? Sometimes we don't see it and we just think like, and then you get a little pissy like, I was only trying to help. Like, don't they see that I was only trying to be helpful? But if that's not how they're experiencing it, you have to take that into account, right? We got to be able to kind of put our ego aside and say like, okay, but what does this person really, really want or need or whatever? And sometimes it's not us getting up in their business or being all helpy. You know what I'm saying? So, but I love the natural desire. I think by and large humans really are goodness. I think that we are good. And somewhere along the way we got caught up in the racket of things and trying to, excuse me, hustle and make money the priority instead of love, or power the priority instead of love. And the ego really deals in the market, the black market of fear. You know what I mean? So, yeah. All right. I think I'm going to end it right there. Thank you so much for tuning in, for spending a little time together. I appreciate you and I love you. You can always get on my email list. That's one of the best things to do. If you just want to kind of keep in up to date or like whatever's going on when I'm offering fun things. Like we just wrapped up that 30-day challenge, the good, the beautiful, holy. That was wicked fun. And those kinds of things, if you want to find out about those things, right, get on my email list, karenkenney.com/sign up. You could also come hang out with us in the nest. We're having a blast over there, and that's karenkenney.com/nest, N-E-S-T. And if you want to support the show, please, by all means, right? Help me. Feel free to help me by sending me a little tip. That would be awesome. That is a welcome help. P.S. by the way. And that's just karenkenney.com/tip jar. And just thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. And I'm thinking of you and I'm blasting you with so much love. Wherever you go, may you leave yourself and the people and the animals and the planet and the environment better than how you found it. Wherever you go, may you and your presence and your helpfulness be a blessing. Bye.